Hi, I'm Richard Denton, and I'm supervising the development of the Phase 1 semantic representations for our project in Alderword, trying to get the meaning of the whole Bible into the computer. So this video I'm intending mainly for our new people in the Philippines who are going to be working with us, but it might be useful for some other people as well. So I'm going to switch to screen view now, so you won't see me anymore. Um, and first of all, I want to talk about our semantic representations. So there are two stages, what we call phase 1 and what we call phase 2. So I'm going to bring up the TBTA program here. And I got to this screen by clicking on Utilities and then Proposition Analysis. So this is one of the screens that I look at quite often to try to understand how TBTA works. And this shows up at the top what we call the phase 1. And it looks kind of like English, although it has some specialized notation. It has this title in parentheses, has this underscore notation, underscore paragraph, underscore implicit necessary. When you have a first person pronoun, it puts the referent, the person you're talking about, in parentheses, I, Yahweh. So that means it would normally be translated as I, but the program needs to know who the person is. So this is what the phase 1 people are going to be working on, getting this. Then the phase 2 people run this through the analyzer, and it comes out looking like this. So this is a more abstract notation. Sentences are in these double brackets, like here's the beginning of the red sentence and here's the end of that sentence. And then you notice you have God, like God here, but we don't have will. So we have just punish. So the reason is because will punish means the future tense of punish. And if you hover the mouse over the middle column in punish, you can see the third entry there. It says immediate future. So some words that are in the phase 1 don't get translated into a separate word in the phase 2. It may be just a feature. Anyway, we have phrases. So this is a noun phrase with God, verb phrase with punish, and this is a noun phrase with enemy. So this is the phase 1 and this is the phase 2. So we're going to be talking about working on the phase 1. Now, I understand that you all have been studying English grammar. There is some value to that. For instance, I noticed in the books that you have, it talks about two kinds of relative clauses. And these, in our terminology that we use in TBTA, we call these either restrictive or descriptive. So here's an example of a restrictive clause. Mary met the man that I saw yesterday. Now it's called restrictive because the clause that's here, this is the relative clause, that narrows down or restricts the meaning of the noun phrase here, the man. So it restricts the meaning to the particular man that I saw yesterday. Now, consider this example. David, who is the king of Israel, loves God. Now, the assumption here is that David, in the context of this discussion, say this is a quote, somebody in Israel, and the people in Israel would know who you were talking about if you said David. They would know that that means the king of Israel. So here, when you say who is the king of Israel, it's not really restricting the meaning if the people already know who you're talking about by David. So then who is the king of Israel would just be description. Maybe David has also been referred to in an earlier sentence. Anyway, the idea is that in a descriptive relative clause, you already know who the person is, and this just gives you some extra information. It describes that person. So, in our phase one, the way we write it is this way. Mary met the man, and then you have a left bracket. We always have clauses, subordinate clauses. That means every clause other than the main clause. This is the main clause. Every clause other than the main clause is put in brackets, square brackets. So, so here the relative clause is in these square brackets. And in our system, you can use that or who or which. You can use any of these. And I often use this notation to represent a choice that you can make. So it represents options. So in our system, you can use any of these words that I saw yesterday. Okay, that translates that there. And for a descriptive in the phase one, you can write it this way. David, you can use any of the same words. Who is the king of Israel, loves God. Now, how does TBTA know that in the first case, this sentence has a restrictive clause and this sentence has a descriptive clause? Well, the way it does that is that in TBTA, it assumes if there's a common noun, that is a noun that means something other than, it's not a name, a common noun, it assumes that it's a restrictive clause. So TBTA will, the analyzer will automatically interpret this as a restrictive clause. And here with David, a name of a person, the program automatically interprets that as a descriptive clause. Now this kind of makes sense if you realize that a name pretty much defines a person. There could be multiple Johns or Davids, but usually you're talking about one particular John or David. And when you use the name, it's assumed that the clause is descriptive. So now in the grammar book, it said you can't use that for a descriptive clause. You'd have to use who or which. But in our system, you can use that. You can use any of these words at the beginning of the descriptive relative clause. So there are definitely some differences between natural English grammar and the way we write things for our phase one. And some of the things in natural English grammar get kind of very complicated. There are subtleties about how the way you write it. Whereas in our phase one, we try to use a relatively simple grammar. Now, suppose that for some reason you need to use a descriptive relative clause for a common noun. So consider these sentences. Mary met a new friend. That friend, who is named John, came to Bethlehem yesterday. Okay, so see here, Mary met a new friend. That defines the friend that we're talking about. It's the friend that Mary met. So we no longer, this is no longer a new person. In fact, here I wrote that friend. So usually when we refer to someone who's something that's been defined in a previous sentence, we use that, this or that, and the default is to use that. So here I wrote that friend. So this friend is defined. It's the friend that Mary met. So here we want a descriptive clause, who is named John. The way we do that in TBTA is like this. Mary met a new friend. That friend, and we put in brackets the relative clause, but we use this notation, underscore descriptive, who is named John, came to Bethlehem yesterday. This notation is not automatically interpreted by the program, but anything with an underscore stays in the text and the person working on the phase 2 will see it. This is a note. It's like a comment that the person working on the phase 2 will see. And that person will know to switch the feature for this clause from restrictive to descriptive. Similarly, oh, okay, yeah. In the grammar book, there are some things that it says you can do that we don't do in TBTA. So I wrote an XX here. XXX means you can't do this. You can't write it this way. Mary met a new friend. That friend, whose name is John. Okay, we don't allow a relative pronoun whose for possessives. Instead, you have to do it like this, who is named John, or who, yeah, that would be the right way to do it in this way. You can't say whose name is John. This is another thing that you can do in English grammar, but you can't do in our phase 1. You can't say, John went to see a man. The man to whom John went was named Paul. Okay, there are actually 2 things wrong with this sentence. First of all, in English, it's perfectly valid to say went to see somebody. That too means what in the TBTA system we call the in order to clause. Went in order to see a man. We can't say to. TBTA, the analyzer will misinterpret that, so we have to use in order to. We recommend using the hyphens when there's a word that's hyphenated. So I'm just going to show you. Besides the analyzer screen, another one I use all the time is click on ontology and lexicon, ontology, and then in this case I'm going to go to relations. It says target add position. So in English we often use what we call prepositions for relations. So now I want to go to in order to, so I'm going to click on this drop down box for source concepts, and you can see in order to. The preceding was done to accomplish the following. So that word in order to has hyphens, and we recommend you write it that way, although it turns out that in TBTA you can write in order to without the hyphens, and the analyzer will recognize it. So sometimes I write it without hyphens. So you have to use in order to see a man. One tricky thing about in order to, the agent or subject of this clause has to be the same as the agent of the main clause. So John went in order to, so John is the one who's going to see the man. Okay, but there's another thing wrong with this. The man to whom John went. I think I actually found that you can do that. But normally we write it this way. This is not recommended in natural English grammar. This is called a dangling preposition. But we usually write it that way. The man that John went to was named Paul. Let's see if we can do that. So I'm going to show you how I can, oh, I have to switch to the analyzer language. So I'm going to do that. But that takes a minute to load, so I'll go back to our document. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So, or maybe I won't. No, I won't. I'll go right there. Okay, I went into the analyzer language, went to proposition analysis. Okay, I have a space that we haven't got up to Proverbs 30, so I use this for just testing things. See, the man to whom John went is tall. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to push the analyzer button down here now, and now it's analyzing. Okay, it really messed up. It interpreted this as an event clause. I mean, this word doesn't belong here. I'm going to delete that. Have to delete this. Okay, so it really doesn't work. So let's try, and this is an event clause. You can, if you hover the mouse over that, you see the second line there, event modifier adverbial clause. It should be a relative clause. So we should write it, the man that John went to is tall. Now I'm going to analyze that. So I push the analyze button down here. So if you're doing phase 1, you don't have to do a lot of phase 2, but sometimes it's useful to test to see how things work. We still got a problem with this. I don't know why it did that, but I'm going to push delete words, get rid of that. But the key thing is that it analyzed it a lot better. So we have man as the subject of this sentence, or the agent, and then this is a relative thing modifying clause. It describes a thing or a noun or an object, and it's a relative clause. The man that John went to. And this man was recognized to be oh, it didn't get this right either. That's going to have to be corrected. It says this is a patient. This should be a destination argument. So, you know, the analyzer is very imperfect. And the phase 2 person needs to make a lot of corrections. It should be John went, and this should be a destination to that man. And it didn't do it correctly, but it did do it better. It did recognize it as a relative clause. So what I'm saying is you should write it this way. The man that John went to was named Paul. Okay, now there are lots of resources for learning how we do the phase 1. And the first one is the videos that I made. So in this document, I have a link for the videos. So I'm going to paste that into Chrome here and go there. And here I see one of the videos it's showing. So you don't need to see me twice. So I'm not going to play that video. So we have a lot of videos. This is the playlist for the semantic representation tutorials. They start with number 0, number 1. There are a couple of things that you need to know about these videos. First of all, you know, I started on these videos a long time ago, and since then we've changed some of the ways that we do things. And for instance, and I mentioned that in this tutorial 0. So you have to be cautious about interpreting these videos. Like I recommend using simple Bible translations like the International Children's Bible and the Easy English Translation. But now we recommend another source, the Translation Notes Display Text. So later in this series, toward the end, I start to talk about that, about how we are using, starting here with 77. resources for creating phase one from the translation notes display text. So from here on, it's using our newer method. But these early videos are still very useful because they go into a lot of detail and they are stated simply. Everything is stated simply, whereas at the end videos, I kind of assumed you knew what was going on. Another thing to note is that under the videos, there is okay, here. I wanted to show you some of the videos, and unfortunately I haven't gone through all of them. But some of the videos up to like 13 or something, or 15, have some text below the title of the video. So below the video down here, and they have some corrections. So here, for instance, it says, this video is useful for understanding why word-for-word translations are not best for our system, but keep in mind that we're now using the SIL translation notes display text as our primary source. That doesn't mean it necessarily has to be the only source, but when you're considering how to do things, we definitely want you to be looking at that. Okay, so you know, we recommend working through all of these videos. You don't have to learn the part about how to do phase two as well as the part about doing phase one, but the other people who have worked through these videos assure me that the phase two videos are also useful for understanding our system. But keep in mind that you would be doing the phase one. Okay, a second resource, a second group of meetings is our team meetings, because I've been doing some teaching in the team meetings, kind of like what I'm doing right now with you. And so this is the YouTube playlist, the link for that. And so if I go back to this, and now I paste this new. Okay, so it says ATW team meetings. So there's some teaching that I do in these team meetings that you might find useful, especially after you've gone through the other tutorials. Okay, then I think a really good way to learn how to write phase one is to look at some of the phase one that people have already done. So there are two places you can look at these. One is in Zoho and one is in Paratext. So in Zoho, Paratext might be the more up-to-date because there may have been changes that were made in response to the consultants. But in Zoho, it shows you how we write the text in the first part of our process. So here, if I go into Zoho, okay, so I've put you at what's templates. That's what David calls our semantic representations. And so if we were to go to, say, John chapter 1. Okay, so this is how we write the phase one here. And so you see this notation for a title. we always use the present tense in titles, so the word becomes a human. So we have a specialized word here that means the word that's used in John. And then here we have a complex version of the next sentence and a simple version. The complex versions are used for what we call level 3 words. That'll be explained elsewhere. But beginning is one of those. And so whenever you want to use one of these very complex words like beginning, you have a complex version, but then you have to write it in a simple fashion. Before God created the world. So that's representing the meaning of in the beginning. And then in the Zoho, we show what we call our pseudo-English or English back translation. So this is supposed to represent how TBTA should generate this text in English. Now this wasn't actually created from the program. Someone did this knowing what the program is supposed to do. Because sometimes the program doesn't have the capability yet to generate this because it needs some extra words or something. Like maybe create hasn't been added as a complex word. And also it takes some time to do the corrections, and our phase 1 people don't need to be bothering with that. So this is how one of our phase 1 people said that this text should be translated in English. And now it looks more like English. You don't have these brackets, for instance, around a clause. Although it still has some extra notation, like a notation for a title and a notation for a new paragraph. Another place where you can find the phase 1 is in Paratext. So here I am, and here I click on the translation notes display, and let's go to John chapter 1:1. Okay, so the TBTA P1 is the resource for the phase 1. The word becomes a human. And then there's a complex sentence in the beginning. The word was. There was the word. So looks like this was corrected from what we had in Zoho. This is the form of the verb, which is to be, which is existential. It means that there is something. So this would be translated, in the beginning, there was the word. And then the TBTA P3 resource, and you should have access to these resources, is our English back translation. It's a little bit misleading, this name P3, because we mean something else when we say phase 3. But this is what we call it. This is our English back translation. In the beginning, there was the word. So see, I was saying that that would be generated in English as there was. Before anything was created by God, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So there's a literal version of this sentence and a dynamic version. The literal one has beginning, the dynamic was created. Actually, in the phase 1, these aren't literal and dynamic, it's complex and simple. But for the consultants, we've been changing complex to literal and simple to dynamic. Now, I'm not expecting you to remember everything that I'm saying right now, but I just wanted to show you that you can look at the phase 1 here in Paratext on this TBTA P3, P1 resource, and how it's supposed to be generated in English, the TBTA P3 resource. Now, when I started out, when I went to France, I had a Bible in French, and I read the French for my devotional time. And you might consider reading this phase 1 for your devotion time in order to learn the phase 1. Because by reading it, you can learn how the language works. In a sense, our phase 1 is like a foreign language. Okay, so you can find in any of those resources, either of these resources, Zoho or Paratext, and we recommend you look at these Gospels that we worked on, Matthew, Mark, the first chapters of John, and Proverbs, which I'm working on. Proverbs shows you how to deal with more difficult verses where you need lots of dynamic alternates. There's an introduction to using Paratext at this link. Huh, or is it? That's not working for me. I wonder why. Oh, it says it's working. Okay, there it is. Okay, Paratext 9 training videos. So, boy, it gives you a lot of information. So you can get information about how to use Paratext here. Okay, what we've been doing is starting out working in phase 1, and then after we get it all settled and it's ready to go to the consultant, we've been putting it in Paratext at that point. I already mentioned the TBTA ontology, so you find that by going into the program Ontology and Lexicon, Ontology, and then if you want to look at nouns, you go here, Objects and Target Nouns. By the way, earlier I was talking about the distinction between a name. A name is what we call a level 4 word, and they turn out brown here. So these are names, and if you go down, you'll find some words that aren't names, like action is not a name. That's a common noun. So it has cream color here instead of this brown color. There are lots of things you can find out looking at the ontology. You can find out what words we have currently in the system, and they have glosses for the definitions. Now, although the ontology tells you the words that we currently have in the program, it doesn't tell you potentially all the words that we could have. There is the Longman defining vocabulary tells you the words that we usually assume that we can use. It gives you the simple words. So let's see what happens if I put that link in there. Oh, I get you into this helpful documents. Now, a lot of the documents I'm going to show you are in this folder. So that link is for the helpful documents folder. And down, if you scroll down, you'll find the Longman defining vocabulary. And if you double click on that, you see Longman defining vocabulary. And it has the basic words that that this gentleman Longman found are like kind of basic words. And so usually we assume that if a word is in this vocabulary, it can be added into our system. But there are some exceptions. So there are some words that we don't use even though they are in the Longman defining vocabulary. Some of those are modern words that we don't need, and others are words that we think are better expressed in a different way. But usually, if it's in there, you can add it to the vocabulary. There are also complex words, and I discuss elsewhere about how to make the decision as to whether to add a complex word. But we have a document It's called How to Represent Complex Concepts, or How to Handle Complex Concepts. And it has the complex concepts, and this shows you how to use it. We have things called explications, and this shows you how to write things, or there are words that we pair. Like here, if you use aloe, you can pair that with oil. So the way this works is if aloe is not in the vocabulary, the program will know to use oil instead. Over in the right column, it tells you if we're going to have that word in our system. If it says yes here, that means that we should have this word aloe as a complex word in our system. And if it isn't yet in the ontology, it should be added sometime later. There's more description about this document later in some of the videos. Then there's a document I made recently that's especially helpful for people starting out doing phase one. It's called the phase one checklist. It's kind of a misnomer. It probably should have a different title. It should be the description of common issues that phase one people have, or common problems. So let's go to that document. So this gives you a lot of detail about basic things that you need to know to do phase one. Starts out with a description of words, word senses. So in our system, there may be different senses. Like for thing, we have 4 senses and we're going to have 5. So there's a version of thing which means an object, but thing B means an event, like something that happened. Those things happened would use thing B. There's a description of how we use pronouns. We never use third person pronouns. And when we use first person or second person, you have to indicate the referent in parentheses. There's a discussion of using a, the, that, or this with nouns. The blue things were added more recently than the black things, but they're all in the same document. Description of clauses and how we mark them with brackets. How we use relations. Relative clauses. Patient clauses. So a patient clause is like John wanted to eat food. We have this verb want here, and then there's eat is another verb. Whenever you have a verb, it indicates a clause. So this is a patient clause. It's an argument of the verb want. So this is talking about how we write patient clauses. Talk about how to express causality, how to say that one thing is caused by another. Talk about how we express implicit information. And there's a lot of more detail about specialized notation in another document I'm going to show you in a moment, the summary of specialized notation. Talk about how we do quotes in TBTA, talk about titles and paragraph markings, answers to questions, passives and rhetorical questions, the generic genitive, like the town of Judah, that's specifying a generic genitive relation. A couple of very specialized constructions that we have for explaining names and expanding a noun phrase. So this is a more complicated topic, but one that gives you some extra flexibility. Suggestive let's, if you want to say let's do something, or what we call the jussive. The jussive is like a third person imperative. It's saying let something happen. We want something to happen. How we use English would. Even in any, we don't use those in our, and the perfect tense in English, that's John has gone. We have a way to do that, but we don't always want to use that. Okay, checklist, Intro to TBTA Grammar. So let's take a quick look at that document. This document explains the structure that we have in TBTA. So the basic unit of TBTA is the sentence, and the basic building blocks are words. And in between words and sentences, there are phrases and clauses. So I discuss words, phrases, clauses, and go into some more detail about adjective phrases, types of noun phrases, and talk about the head of a structure. The head is the main element of a structure, which may be modified by other things. And that's important when we're talking about implicit information. And then I talk about the different types of clauses. And then a summary of the TBTA grammar. And I talk about some common mistakes that people made. So you'll be sure to want to read these, because I'm sure that you're going to make these mistakes. And hopefully you'll be able to learn how not to make those mistakes. But everybody does when they start out. So then there's another document, Summary of Specialized Notation. I did not write this as recently as these others, so there may be things that need to be corrected, but hopefully not too much. So let's go to that document. This document is also in that helpful folder, helpful resources document. So it's a summary of some specialized notation for TBTA. There's some overlap. So here I have a note about the perfect tense that was in that other document. But this one's specifically talking about notation, like how we write notation for paragraph markings, how we mark quotes. There's more detail here than in the other document. Proposition arguments, there's some overlap with the other document. How we indicate sense, again, some overlap. There's more detail on this notation for implicit, marking implicit information, how we write imperatives, first and second pronouns. So this goes on and on and on. Some other people added some specialized notation, some notes for P2. The underscore notation always shows a note that P2 will see. P2 is what we call the person who works on the phase 2. Okay, well, I hope you see that there are a lot of resources for you to learn. I especially recommend the videos, and then that you look at phase 1, and then read these other documents as well. Okay, so thank you for your attention today.